All right, so continuing our discussion around React State and using setState in particular, we now need to talk about mutable data structures. So far, everything we've stored in state has been a primitive value. Numbers, strings, booleans, these are common, we use them all the time, but also a lot of our applications are going to include objects and arrays and nested arrays and objects inside of state. So let's say we're building this application and we need to update or alter one of these to-do objects inside of the to-dos array. So let's say we're completing one of them. We want to change it from false to true, or we're going the other way, from true to false. Here's one potential implementation. So we have a function called complete to-do, and it takes an ID. So we first need to find that ID, or that to-do, using the ID. So we could do this.state.todos.find, and we're trying to find where the to-do ID equals the ID we pass in. So then we have a variable called the to-do or the to-do that is equal to the item we're trying to change inside of the to-dos array. Then we could simply set .done to be true. And then we would call setState and pass in this.state.todos. So we update one part of that state and then we just reset it. Now this is not good. You might be able to tell by these comments here. No and bad. The reason this is bad is kind of annoying to talk about. And the reality of it is that it's sometimes fine. You can get away with it. I'll show you that this will work a lot of the time, but it's not the React way, and for a good reason. It can cause problems down the line. We'll talk more about this as we discuss lifecycle methods and about this process called reconciliation and what React does behind the scenes. But for now, just remember, even if it could work, even if you get away with it, this is not going to be the way we actually update our state. What we do instead is actually make a copy of the data structure that we're working with. And we update that copy and then reset the whole thing in the state. So for example, here's the same complete to-do function or method, takes an ID, and we're just trying to toggle one to have done set to true. In this case, we're using map. So we are going over all the to-dos, mapping to a new array. And if that to-do in question, where the ID is equal to the ID we're looking for, if we find that one, we are going to return a new object. So we're not simply toggling or changing the existing one like we did here, the to-do.done. Instead, we're using the spread operator. So if you're not familiar with spread, this is going to come up a lot in React and Redux programming, and I recommend you get comfortable with it. But what this does right now is it takes the existing to-do object and basically takes the contents, copies them over to a new object, and then we are going to set done to be true. So this object here is a new object. It's a copy where done is set to true. Up here, what we were doing is taking the existing object and just changing a value, changing a property. That's the bad way, even though it seems easier. It is easier, honestly. It makes more sense. It's more logical when you're just writing the code, but that's not the React way. Instead, we make a new object, which is just a copy of the existing one, and then we add in our change. Then we're going to set state with this new to-dos array. So this is weird, and I totally recognize that. This is one of the hardest parts of learning React, is learning to think this way about how you update and set state. A lot of what you'll be doing is writing functions, pure functions, using map, filter, reduce, and the spread operator all the time. So the pattern that we follow a lot is we take the existing state, and if we want to update a small part of it, if it's an object, if it's an array, a data structure, we are going to make a copy of it. And then in that copy, make our change, and then set state. So let me show you an example using code. So here is a almost completed demonstration. It's really simple. I'm using Font Awesome, and I'm going to have a button that I can click, and I want to keep adding new icons to this H1. So I have a list of potential icons, like an angry face, an anchor, the @ sign, a baby icon. So I'm going to pick one of these randomly and append it or add it to an array in my state. And then I'm displaying all of those icons right here. So right now there's nothing in there. This.state.icons.map. And then for each icon, I'm making an element, an icon element. And then class name, this is similar to what we did for the dice exercise. It's FAS space FA dash some icon string. So if I just start this.state icons, right now it's empty, but if I put one in here like bone and then cloud, let's do two of them. You'll see over here, both of them are showing up. So I want to now click on this and have a new one show up and another one and another one. So I'm going to randomly select an icon and append it to the icon's state. So I already have the add icon method written, or almost written. I'm picking a random index from all of these options. Then I'm using that index to access an actual option, an actual icon, like angry. So I have this string right here. So the bad way, the thing we're not supposed to do that we just discussed, would look like this. We would basically make a variable for the current icons in the state. So let's just call it icons, this.state.icons, and then we could push onto that icons.push and then pass in the new icon. So we've just updated that array, we've mutated it. Then we reset. So we'll just say this.setState. The icons in the state are now equal to this icons array that we updated. So I guess it's kind of confusing. I used icons here twice. So we could call this, old icons or something. But it doesn't matter because this is not the way that we're supposed to do things. So if we take a look, it will work. And that's kind of the annoying thing. There's not necessarily a problem here, but just remember, this is not how we're supposed to do things. Well, supposed to is the wrong way of putting it. This is not the right way of writing React state updates. Instead of directly mutating an object or an array and then saving that to the state, instead we make a copy of the existing data structure and update it. Also, you might notice this. We've been seeing this a couple times, this warning about needing to have a unique key. Don't worry, we will revisit that. I'm just ignoring it for now. Okay, so the correct way of doing this, or at least one option, would look more like this. Add icon. We still need to pick our random icon, so we do need these lines. So I'll uncomment those. But then instead of taking the existing icons array and pushing onto it, all that we'll do is make a new array where we take the existing this.state.icons. So that's already what's in there. And then we're going to add on to it the new icon. So this won't work on its own. All that this is doing is making a new array. But if you wanted to just take a look at this, let's console.log it. If you're not super familiar with the spread operator, you're going to see it a lot. You'll see when I click, archway has been added to the end. So we took the original two, and then we made a new array containing those two and added in the third. Now we're not saving it to the state. We're not setting the state. So we need to do that now. So it's just this dot set state, and then fix my parens here. We need an object, and we're going to say icons is now equal to this brand new array that wasn't there before. Up here, we took an existing array, altered it, and saved it. Down here, we're taking the existing array and spreading it or unpacking it into a brand new array and adding in something new. So it's a very different approach. It will look the same at the end of the day, and it works exactly the same way as far as from a user's perspective, but it's a very different pattern for how we actually update the state. So again, this takes time to get used to, and this is probably one of the simplest examples, just adding into an array, where we just copy over to a new array and add in the new thing. It gets a little more complicated when we talk about deleting or updating properties and nested data. So let's hop back to the slides and just recap what we talked about. So a much better way to update your state, especially with nested objects, is to make a copy of the data structure in question, and then to simply change or add to or delete something from that new version and save that using set state. So you'll see a lot of map, filter, and reduce and the spread operator. And you might be thinking, well, this seems sort of inefficient to make all these copies of arrays and objects. And that's true. It definitely is less efficient. Now, most of the time, it's worth that cost. If you're not familiar with big O notation, this is this O of n, which says that as your array or your object grows, as the size of n grows, so does the amount of space and time needed for this operation. If we're copying 10 items, we have to do 10 things. If we're copying 1,000,000 items, we have to do 1,000,000 things. So there is a slight efficiency cost, but it's worth it in the end to prevent these really hard to find, super mischievous side effects and bugs that might arise if you are directly mutating these objects and arrays in the state. Okay, so to recap this video, it sounds like an oxymoron, but immutable state, this idea of immutable state means that there's an old state object and then a new state object that are both snapshots in time. So you take the old one, you copy it, and you change it. You remove something, add something, update a property, and then you use that to set the state. And the safest way is to always make a copy of it and call this.setState with a new copy. It's a pain. It changes a lot of how you write code and a lot of how you think about updating the state. If you don't have a lot of experience working with pure functions, immutable objects, all of that stuff, there's a bit of a learning curve. But we'll walk you through it. There's a lot of time for us to practice, a lot of activities to get good at it. And just as a reminder, this is a good habit to get into for React apps. It's not technically required, but it absolutely is required for Redux.